If My People Bible Reading Part 140. We've just finished Ezekiel, a rather voluminous prophetic book. And naturally, what follows after this, in time frame, when the scrolls came out, is actually, unlike most Bibles that you find out there, it's Lamentations. Now, Lamentations is mostly about Jerusalem, the fall of Judah, and but mostly Jeremiah. So this is more of an introduction because we just finished Ezekiel. Big things are happening. Follow the instructions. So now we get into the book of Lamentations, which was actually written and accessible to the public and the priests next. And it doesn't seem to flow like, well, if you do all these things, the things will be fine. Now all of a sudden the book of Lamentations is the exact opposite. We see Ezekiel laid forth everything that needed to be done. The people were going to be coming back to Jerusalem and southern Israel, Judah, very soon to rebuild their land, their homes, and their temple, following the instructions. And they followed someone else's instructions, inferior instructions. And so at the end of Lamentations and at the end of Jeremiah, here we have the weeping prophet. He's overlooking Jerusalem. He goes, it's a wreck. He's almost weeping, looking over Jerusalem, going, look at this. It's sad. It's it's. Does that sound familiar? It's going to sound familiar to Yeshua, looking over Jerusalem, saying almost the same thing. So there's where Lamentation comes in. So Lamentations really sets it for the book after this. So keep going in your reading to the book of Jeremiah, which comes next. So let's begin with it. Other than Jeremiah, books I grew up in old school. I paid a lot of attention to stories my grandparents told me because I'll just kind of say this. My parents liked to party a lot and they liked to go dancing and they had a great time together and they were married for many, many years together. So, but that's what they liked to do. And openly and admittedly, my parents, especially, they just reluctantly had children. Uh, my dad's two sisters had three children each. So my parents had three children, and then my mother's brother had three children, and it just kind of flowed that way. So I ended up in the summer times in Bible school, Baptist Bible school, every summer in my with my grandmother. My brother was separated from me because that's what my parents did, and my sister was separated from all of us, and I don't actually know where she was every summer for years. I have no idea. I was just a kid. I just grew up near in the summer near Lutesville and Marble Hill, Missouri, and that's where I went to vacation Bible school. But one of the books I loved going to the library. My both my grandparents on the Scott side just loved going to the library, and I just love that too. And I grew up spending most of my time in St. Louis County until high school, and then I really went all over the United States after that, working for the government. But libraries is where I spent my time. And one of the books was Dante, and Dante's Paradiso and Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno, and I just, which is a lamentation thing. It's all about lamentation and about the 10 layers of heaven, and it's all a story. Okay, and the 10 layers of hell, and that was fascinating. And when you go through the prose and the poets and all that, and get down to it, it's a really fascinating story. So Jeremiah and Dante, very much the same. This whole book of Lamentations, it's a short one. It's a short scroll. Jeremiah began his ministry during the reign of Josiah. And both he and Josiah were young men. They were obviously friends, and Josiah was the last. There's not much good to say about all the kings of northern Israel. There's not good. It's just pathetic. With Judah, it was better, but pathetic. Not as pathetic. But Josiah was basically the last of the great revivals. That was it. And Judah and Jerusalem went down and has not returned. Has not returned. So 1948 is just a great majority of the people that were from certain parts of the world. World War II brought very little from Western Europe. They went United States, other places, anywhere that they could be allowed to go. Okay? They did not go to Israel. Okay? So I disagree with so many. I am in the very small minority that think that that Israel was not refounded, and again in 1948. They are certainly a blooming country, but blooming in what terms? Blooming for the love of their father, which they still deny, the love of Yeshua, their son, his son, which they still deny, the atheism, which they deny everything except the only gods of this world are themselves and what they can accomplish through science. So, no, that has not occurred. Has not occurred at all. And in this book of Lamentations, what followed Josiah was Jehoaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah. And after Zedekiah, if you remember, there's had a daughter, and I believe her name was Scota, Scota. Interesting. If you follow the history and the folklore and everything that came out of Scota, you certainly see when the first book in the New Covenant, when we get to it, is Yaakov, James, the half brother of Yeshua. That was actually the first book, not Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John. Okay, when you follow the books, the scrolls that were written, the letters that were written, and read them as they came out, you can now understand why James says, he's writing to the scattered tribes. If you write a letter to your scattered friends, do you know where to send the letter? Or do you just put it in the post office and hope it finds them? Because they're lost. Answer is, you know where they are. Second, does the letter go to someone who knows who they are? Do the scattered people know that they're of the tribes of Israel? Yes. So is it to say that the history that's been documented so far, especially in the history and genealogy of Yeshua, is superior? But then the history of what you still have through this biblical history, that the people today, a good number of the people today in all 12 tribes know who they are. They're scattered, and they're lost in the faith. They're not lost, and they know who they are. Very important to understand that as we read through the Word. And so this book of Lamentations is exactly what it is. And which country uses the word lament and dirge, like to dirge, to sing or play a song that's a lamenting song, a dirge, like you play at a funeral. You don't play jazz band music at funerals unless you're in New Orleans. And so that's the history of the end of Judah right there I just gave you. So the book of Lamentations is composed of just 5 chapters, and each chapter is an elegy. It stays the same. It doesn't change. It's a dirge. And the reason the entire scroll stays the same is because it's telling you something. So when you finish it, you can understand why Jeremiah was a man of sorrow. And Jeremiah reminds us of another who sat weeping over Israel. Jerusalem. The only difference is that Jerusalem was in ruins and the temple already burned as Jeremiah gazed upon the debris. Yeshua wept over the same city about 600 years later because of what was going to happen to her. Going. There was a beautiful Herod's temple when Yeshua was looking over the city. He was looking at a desolate, destroyed, horrific situation. Death and destruction. Massive. At the time he was doing it, there was nothing death and destruction massive. It was just power and control over Rome, and the Hasmonean dictators and the Pharisees and Sadducees are just pretty sad, pathetic individuals. And even Paul, who was a young man at that time, who would later grow up under the same training of these Pharisaics to become a lawyer, and so erroneous that he literally had to be struck down by Yeshua before he finally got the point. So the key verse in the book of Lamentations explains the reason why Jerusalem lays in ruins. For Adonai is righteous. He knows all these people are going to be going into captivity. He even knows the immediate future. Of course he does. Him and the Father already caught. So there's your explanation of Lamentations. And the next natural thing you're going to do is you're going to roll straight into Jeremiah. And now when you go through Jeremiah, you can understand why he's thinking and doing everything he is. So it makes sense to do Lamentations before Jeremiah. Okay, chapter 2, verse 7 of Lamentations. Yahweh has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. He has handed over the enemy to the enemy. The walls of their palaces they have raised a shout in the house of Yahweh as on the day of an appointed feast. Comment. Even Yeshua, when he was in the temple area, never entered the Holy of Holies. Is that interesting? He was never concerned about looking for the Ark of the Covenant or anything man-made. Even today, we should not be looking nor care about the cup, the chalice, all these things. Yeshua entered the real Holy of Holies, at his ascension. So he went to the real thing, and that's where he is today. Chapter 4, verse 10. With their own hands, compassionate women have cooked their own children, who became their food when my people were destroyed. Oh, wow. We'll comment on that. In heathen practice, the people offered their children to Baal. That's the way they did it in the world, all over the world. Even in Chile, even in Peru, even in the Andes, even on these strange places in Mexico. Yes, they did, all over the world. Wonder where they learned that. How did people all over the world do the same pagan, blood ritual, gut-wrenching sacrifice? It makes you think, doesn't it? Who taught them that? Who was the father of that? Who's the author of that? Well, now here we read children being eaten for food. And yet our glorious nation, the one we have right now, the United States, has sacrificed over 67 million to abortion rights. Are we just the same as them? And even worse, because I worked in 2 hospitals, I can tell you, that were harvesting. And that means they didn't take dead bodies from a grave and chop up the pieces or do anything with them other than to just play with them. They were using live human beings who could be living if you just saved them. Instead, use the pieces for sale, for money, for revenue, for making big bucks, and for experimenting, for saving people with horrified burns and putting baby skin on them so that they can have new grafted skin that looks beautiful. That's going on all over the world today. And yet, Mr. Christian, Mr. Shepherd, what are we doing about it? I'll tell you what I'm doing about it. And I'm not going to say it on the air here, but I've done a lot of things to try to shut that nonsense down. That is evil. That is an incredible amount of evil through and through. And I've walked away from a couple career jobs into 6+ figures because of that too. If you just toe the rope, Bruce, You won't have to worry about a thing the rest of your life. You'll be financially rich. Just turn the other way. No, and neither should you. We'll see you at the next one in the book of Jeremiah.